So this morning we're doing this press conference to talk about SB 140, which was vetoed last night by myself, the reasons for that veto, and what may occur with education in the future. So first thing I want to do, and I think it's very important, is to thank the legislature, especially the House of Representatives and members of the Senate. I really want to thank the Speaker and her team. The reason I want to do that is because they came out of the gate, right out of the gate, to address education. Education historically in the state of Alaska in the legislative process has usually taken a back seat to many other things. And we have a lot of needs, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we still have to work on things like energy, for example, and infrastructure projects. Very important that we do that. But the House took the initiative, worked on a legislative package. Many of the items I agreed with, especially, and we'll talk about that here in a moment, charter schools, et cetera, and worked hard at it. The bill that eventually was passed by both bodies, from my perspective, and I mentioned this at the last press conference we had, I thought fell short of some of the things that needed to be in there, especially when it came to things like charter schools, bonuses for retention of teachers, and several other things I'll talk about here. But I need to thank them. I need to thank the House. I need to thank Kathy Tilton, the Speaker. I need to thank a number of other folks, legislators associated with that majority Republican caucus. I think they did an amazing thing, to be honest with you. And usually the first couple, you guys know this, you're down here a lot, usually the first few weeks in the session, it's kind of warming up, to the mid period of the session and then the late ending period of the session. But these guys turned it around, and I think that's what the people of Alaska wanted, and I got to commend them for that. Education is very important. Funding, and we'll talk about that in a moment, is very important. But also the processes and the environments and the ways kids learn and the ways families can educate their kids, very important. So I want to thank Speaker Tilton. I want to thank the House majority. And I thought they did an outstanding job. I also want to thank the Senate. And I want to single out Senator Wilkowski. And the reason I do that is, as there's negotiations going on between both bodies and myself on what would be in the eventual package, the Senate, under Senate President Stevens, and I'm not sure how this happened, but basically asked the Senator Wilkowski, to work with the House and work with our office. And I have to tell you that in every meeting that I had with Senator Wilkowski, very professional, very respectful, I thought very positive discussions we had on how we could bridge the gap. Because what you're doing here with a bill like this is, very diverse state Alaska is, very diverse legislature that we have here, and you have a governor. And we're all trying to put together a package. It's not always easy. I mean, for the most part, these are very difficult discussions. But I want to hand it to Senator Wilkowski and members of the Senate. And as I mentioned, Speaker Tilton and her team. They came from different perspectives and brought something together. From my perspective, obviously it wasn't enough, or I would have either signed the bill into law or would have let it become law. But what was important to me is to constantly focus on what are the outcomes that we want, how do we get to those outcomes, and what are some of the good things we're doing in education in the state of Alaska. And I'm going to talk about that here as we go through this press conference. So, and I'm not doing this but to make light of anything, but I really do believe that I think it was the February 5th editorial by the ADN was really, I think, framed, it was the roadmap in many respects. I mean, I don't have oftentimes the best relationship with some aspects of the media, but I will defend their right, even when they are not very necessarily complimentary to myself, I'll defend their right to do their job. So I just want to read a couple things because it's very important. It's incredibly important, and to frame this. So if there's one thing nearly all Alaska legislators and Governor Mike Dunleavy can agree on this legislative session, it's that Alaska's public education system needs attention and funding. And that's what the House did right out of the gate. They gave it attention. if the state is to improve on a host of priorities, from student achievement to retention. They nailed it. They framed it, and I think it's very important. So as you remember, over the last 2 years, I have filed a number of bills. Over the last 6 years, I've filed a number of bills dealing with education. As a senator, I filed bills dealing with education because that's been my career. That's what I know. That's been my profession. One of the bills we filed last year was a parental rights bill that's gone nowhere. That bill, we know that some people don't agree that parents should have specific rights when it comes to their kids in education. We believe most Alaskans believe they do, but we understand that there are political groups at play that don't want that to happen. Why do I bring up the parental rights? We didn't make that a big issue in this discussion. So that was a priority, I think, for all Alaskans, that we said, okay, we'll set it aside this year so that we can work on some things that maybe can bridge the gap between the various players in the legislature and my office. For years and years, we have tried to figure out how can Alaska compete with other states when it comes to retaining and recruiting teachers. This is not something that's new. You can read the research by Professor Kleinfeld from the University of Alaska. It goes back decades and decades and decades on this issue. And so in 2020, we commissioned a study run in part by Dr. Barbara Adams, who's at various times associated with the University of Alaska, who worked with me in the Teacher Mentor Project. People seem to forget that I worked and was the lead in the Teacher Mentor Project for years to try and work at getting teachers to remain in the teaching profession and in various parts of the state. So in 2020, we commissioned a little research study to say, what is it that teachers want, right? You're supposed to ask the customers, like we're supposed to ask the students what they need and the parents what they need. You certainly have to ask the teachers what they need. So we asked them, and one of the top things was compensation. But if you look at that report, it really harks to environment as well. So we said, we're in a highly competitive world right now, across the nation. We have teachers coming from foreign countries, and I want to thank those teachers that come from foreign countries to come to the United States. We wouldn't be here speaking about the teacher bonuses because that would be a non-issue. That's not the case. So I want to thank every teacher that is in the profession. We're losing them. This is why we put forth a teacher retention recruitment bonus. It would have been $58 million. You know, people have made light of teachers. Oh, they just want their summers off. They don't really work hard. They just. Well, if that were the case, we wouldn't be having a teacher shortage. And if that were the case, we wouldn't be here speaking about the teacher bonuses because that would be a non-issue. That's not the case. So I want to thank every teacher that is in the profession. We're losing them. This is why we put forth a teacher retention recruitment bonus. It would have been $58 million. But it would have enabled us to set up a study for 3 years to see if that really works. And if it really works, then the obvious conclusion is that you pay them more. You raise the base. But we wanted to see if that truly was what was at play in Alaska. We think it was. So we suggested a teacher recruitment bonus package. $5,000 for basically your urban school districts for classroom teachers. $5,000 is going to be more money that they received in 1 year than in many of their raises, which this is not part of their negotiated agreements. This is between the state and the individual teachers. Other school districts, more rural, $10,000. Now, if they stay for 3 years, that's $15,000 in the urban areas. That's $30,000 in some of our rural areas. And for our really remote areas that have been plagued with teacher turnover, that's $15,000. $45,000 would have been significant. Right? It's no brainer. ADN editorial. Nearly everyone agrees Alaska has a problem attracting and keeping new teachers. Alaska teachers were once the best compensated in the U.S., but in recent years, their pay has regressed. Absolutely. And that's true, I think, of teachers across the country. There's no question that constant teacher turnover of vacant positions is making it tougher for our students to succeed. That's common sense as well. Dunleavy has proposed, as he did last year, a bonus incentive program for teachers intended to help stem turnover, particularly in rural areas where I spent almost 20 years. What does the ADN article, ADN editorial board go on to say? This would be a one-time cash payment to teachers. And quote, it's not a bad idea. When did more pay ever fail to increase job satisfaction or attract new job seekers? A cash bonus to teachers would be a great incentive. This is the ADN, and they're right. They're right. It's common sense. Great incentive to move to or stay in Alaska for a teaching career, particularly for younger teachers. You're a young teacher. You go to rural Alaska like I did to Koik, Alaska. Beautiful place. Fell in love with the place and the people in the 80s. New teachers going out to rural Alaska today, many of them are carrying student debt. Can you imagine going out to a remote place in rural Alaska in which the state is saying to you, thank you. You have your negotiated agreement. You're going to get paid through your school district. But the state is saying, we want to thank you for coming out here. And if you stay for 3 years in some of the most remote parts of the state, you will get $45,000 you would have never gotten to help pay off your student loans, to help pay down your debt, maybe buy a plane ticket to go back and see your friends and family. $45,000. Great idea, right? Well, Dunleavy, what happened to that idea? The very association, NEA, that has said this is why they're here, is to help look out for teachers, did not support this teacher bonus program. That is a fact. That is a fact. They told me that. They have told others in the building they did not support that. We could have a whole nother press conference on discussing why that is, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, as reporters, they weren't pounding the table. We want the bonus program. We want the bonus program. It was the BSA. Not the bonus program, the BSA. ADN editorial continues. Making payments to teachers directly allows them to spend or save funds at their discretion, based on what makes the most sense for them and their families. That never made it into the final discussions. That was a dead issue. Not killed by me. That was a dead issue. So that's not in the final. Parental rights, we didn't even bring that up. So let's talk for a moment. I'm going to get to the BSA at the end because that is the most important thing for a number of our special interest groups, and then I'll discuss that in a moment here. That is incredibly important. That's more important than teacher bonuses. That's more important than parental rights. And apparently that's going to be more important than charter schools. And I want to talk about that here for a second. You know, the ADN editorial board, they go on, they talk about, you know, the fact that student enrollment has declined over the years. I mean, we point that out. And we're going to talk about why the BSA, I believe why the school districts need to get more money here in a moment. But before we get there, the ADN editorial board goes on to say, striking a balance between paying teachers directly and increasing the BSA is ultimately a philosophical expression of where we should be focusing our resources. Now, for years, people have said in the educational establishment, we need the BSA so we can pay our teachers. Okay? I'd love for them to show me where an urban teacher, under their method, would have an extra $5,000 in their pocket, or $10,000 or $15,000. You're not going to find it. Let's go to charter schools. I have to tell you, probably one of the most earth-shaking moments in my career was when I read this article about research that Harvard did, in which they said, and I had to read it 3 times, right? Because we have struggles in our system in our neighborhood schools and some of our school districts. Many of our neighborhood schools do absolutely great. There's no doubt about it. But I had to read this over and over and over again. And my staff will tell you, I'll text them all night long, articles and so forth. And I was just astounded. Alaska is #1 in the nation. Not in some of these social issues that plague us that we have to deal with every day. They're #1 in the nation in the charter schools. Charter schools. I didn't make that up. Researchers from Harvard and Stanford, based in Harvard, they did the research. So what did they say? That Alaska's charter schools are the best performing charter schools when using the NAEP scores that are given to kids in 4th and 8th grade nationwide. We come out #1. Well, what happened out there? What does the educational establishment say about that in Alaska? Fantastic. Let's get more charter schools going. This is amazing. That's not what happened. Immediately, there was an attempt by some, well, wait a second, this can't be right. There's something wrong with this Harvard research. Surely it can't be correct, because if it's correct, then Dunleavy's probably going to want to push charter schools, and we can't have that happen. Well, they were correct about that. But surely this can't be correct. Aha! I know what it doesn't do. It doesn't help our most vulnerable minority populations. That's where we're going to take this Harvard study apart. We're going to take it apart. Uh-oh. Anchorage editorial. The study also noted that students from disadvantaged backgrounds who attend charter schools also outperformed their peers. Well, at that point, I'm saying to myself, right? I lived in rural Alaska. I have family members that some would say fall into this group. I said to myself, God, Alaska's so lucky. I want to thank Harvard. And because I am sure now that all of the folks in the educational establishment are going to gather around an effort to enhance and grow our charter schools. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but that wasn't the case. This is important. This is where we're going to take a little time. Parental rights, all right, we'll move that off the table. Teacher retention bonuses, because we plagued with recruitment issues and retention issues. Nah. Seriously, NEA and others? No? No. Okay. All right, we're trying to bridge the gap. We're trying to work together. Charter schools. All right, let's talk about how we can make the charter schools work. Wait a minute, Governor. What? We got a problem with your idea on charter schools. What's that problem? We really don't want the state doing charters. What? What do you mean you don't want the state doing charters? We really don't want the state doing charters for it. No, we're not going to go for it. The evidence on the ground is also clear. This is important. Editorial. Charter schools around the state maintain healthy wait lists. Why in God's name would anyone want to control you can ever get? Yeah, okay, it's fine. We're not going to go for it. You're not going to go for it. No, we're not going to go for it. The evidence on the ground is also clear. This is important. Editorial. Charter schools around the state maintain healthy wait lists. Why in God's name would anyone want to wait to go to a charter school unless they feel it's the appropriate place to put their kids? You got wait lists. All right, let's solve the wait list problem. Let's expand our charter schools, and let's have the state get involved so we can really expand them. No, we don't like that idea either. All right. Don't worry, folks, we're getting close here to the end for questions. editorial again. Charter schools are working, and we should make it easier for them to be born around the state. Nope, not going to happen in this negotiation. No parental rights, no teacher bonuses, very little on charter schools. But Dunleavy, this is a great bill. This is a great bill. So let's get to the final, and by far, the most important reason why we're all here. The most important thing for education in the state of Alaska, the holy grail, the lithium crystals of education, the thing that we fight for, the thing that's what it's all about, this thing called the BSA. That's why we're here. That's what the negotiation should be about. And oh, by the way, Dunleavy, you should agree on a $680 increase to the BSA. Well, tell me why. What does it do, and where'd you come up with $680? Do you know where $680 came from? Do you know where 680 came from? Where did 680 come from?
Not to cover the gap in the Kenai Peninsula School District last year.
Yeah, so it came from the Kenai Peninsula School District. Didn't come from a Harvard study or a Rutgers study, which we'll talk about in a moment here. Didn't come from that. Kenai is a great place, and the school district does a fine job. They said, we'd like to have 680. That became it. That was it. Wasn't researched. Numbers weren't really run. That became it. That became the political goal. So, in the end, the bill came down to just merely being a spending bill. Now, I want to go back to the legislature for a moment, because you're going to ask the question, well, why would they want to do this? Because in the legislative process, with 60 people and 61, the system is set up to be very difficult. And it really is only supposed to work in times of great need, disasters, etc. We all pulled together during COVID, for example. That's what government really is supposed to be about. The further you get away from those disasters, it's difficult because you got to convince people to get around something. So the House worked, and the House worked, and the House worked, and they got as close as they could get. And at some point, you got to fish or cut bait, and you got to take a vote. And they took a vote. And I don't think most legislation, especially this one, I don't think the House members said, hey, this is the greatest thing that ever happened. It's going to revolutionize the system. I think for most of those folks, it was the best we could get. And that's an honest appraisal, and I think it's not a negative at all. I think they worked very hard on it. That was the best they could get. The Senate didn't necessarily agree with some of the things that the House wanted. We didn't necessarily agree with some of the things that the Senate wanted. So in the end, what happened to this bill was it moved in the right direction, but it was still far from addressing our charter schools. It's not going to deal with the teacher retention issues. It just doesn't do that. And I had said in the last press conference, all right, you got a bill. We got 20 days, 15, 20 days. Let's work on some of these other things. Let's work on the teacher retention. Let's work on the charter schools, all right? We're going to narrow the focus. Dunleavy's going to narrow the focus. I was basically told, and I'm paraphrasing, that teacher bonuses is out. It's not going to happen. Just get over it. It's done. Okay, all right, I get it. I understand how the process works. All right, charter schools, surely the thing that's working, the thing that has research behind it, the thing that parents are demanding because there's wait lists, surely we can get to the point where the state can be involved so that if a school district either doesn't want it or doesn't pass muster, we can review and then we can charter. Nope, not gonna happen. So folks, this is why I felt this only ended up being a spending bill that had none of the things that many people in Alaska, parents, kids, Harvard researchers, the Harvard researcher came into my office the day he presented, and as he was leaving, older man, nice man, said, you gotta keep doing what you're doing. Your charter schools are performing. Now, if any of you get bored at night like I do sometimes, you can go online and you could just see the follow-up articles that those researchers write in response to critics of their research. It's fascinating. But that wasn't in there. So let's get to the BSA. Well, Dunleavy, by vetoing this, there's no money. That's not true at all. That is not true at all. That's another scare tactic to scare people. There is going to be money. There's always been money. Well, Dunleavy, there won't be $680 in the BSA. You know, we came up, Kenai, we got to give them credit for coming up with that thing. Maybe, maybe not. I think what we need to do, and my staff will do that, we're going to run numbers to see what really needs to happen. But I can tell you the doors will be open, the kids will be going to school, the teachers, the poor teachers that had an opportunity here that was taken away from them by their own group that's supposed to look out for them, they're going to get paid. The lights are going to be on. It's going to happen. This bill, there was not a dollar in this bill. This bill is an enabling bill that says in the final product of the budget, we'd like to have 680. So regardless of a bill, there's going to be money in the budget. It could be 400, it could be 500, it could even be 700. I doubt that, but the point I'm trying to make is because the bill is vetoed doesn't mean there's not going to be money. There's going to be money. It's going to happen. So knowing that, and knowing what wasn't put into the bill, I vetoed the bill. And yes, and I'll answer your questions here in just 2 minutes, there's discussions about overrides. There's always discussions about overrides. That's part of the process. That's part of the Constitution. Because in the end, it's the people's body that is the appropriator and the final arbiter on these bills. I'm the executive. I carry out the laws. I see problems. I'll introduce bills to deal with these problems, like, you know, and like we did with the teacher retention. I want to thank the House because the charter school concept actually came from Representative Carpenter. I want to thank Representative Ruffridge because the homeschool concept actually came from him. And I know there was a struggle over this bill. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. But in the end, it fell short. And it didn't have to. It didn't have to. I can't think of a good reason other than the educational establishment of this state did not want charter schools because they saw it as a threat to what they're doing, which makes no sense to me. Because if the whole idea is to help kids and help their performance, why wouldn't you take a vehicle that obviously works and expand it? Nope, not going to happen. So in the end, I'm 15 days, 20 days trying to work with people, trying to bridge the gap, couldn't bridge the gap. And so I was faced with, Dunleavy, just pass the bill. Just let it come law. And I kept asking the question with all these bills and all this spending, why? Why? What does this do for families? Well, it gives more money. We can give more money. We don't need a bill. We don't need a new bill to do that. We do that in the budget. We can give more money. We can give new money. Yeah, but you know, blah, 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 blah. So in the end, I don't fault any of the legislators for the work they did on this bill. But the system is set up where it just didn't work. So now we're looking at a potential override, I think, on Monday or Tuesday. That's part of the Constitution. That's in the system. But I would say to the folks that are looking at doing that, you could override and you could have this bill, but that doesn't guarantee money in the budget at the end. That's a whole different process. You could have a budget, you could have a bill with 680 and you may end up with 400 or 300 because it's based upon the appropriation concept that the legislature has. So I would say, you know, if folks are contemplating an override, they have to kind of answer a rhetorical question that probably will be posed to them, actually. Why'd you override? What was the reason that you override? Did you think, did this deal with charter schools in a manner that is going to take care of the backlog of those folks that want to go to charter schools and send out a message to the charter school world that, you know, we're open for business and we're going to help you with charter schools? Bill doesn't really do that. Does it help with teacher retention? Bill doesn't do that. It's a spending bill, turned into a spending bill. It's the way it is. So folks will take a look at it. They'll have to decide if that spending bill which doesn't put $1 into the budget, only the appropriation process does that, if that's worth an override. And they're going to have to make that decision. So with that, Jeff, I'm going to open it up for questions. And
Okay. Okay, we'll take our first question from Eric Stone with Alaska Public Media.
So a bunch of charter school principals and staff testified to Senate Education, during this sort of period between the threat and the actual veto, and a lot of what they said was more or less like, we like the system that currently exists, and more or less, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm curious, what you make of that.
Why is there a backlog? Why is there a backlog? And if the system is good, why not expand a good system? It's about expanding the system. When the charter school concept came to Alaska decades ago, I was here. And I remember the discussions. I was part of the educational establishment. I was an administrator. I was a soup. I was in those discussions. And they were somewhat bizarre back then. They're really bizarre now. We got to stop this. Why do we have to stop this? Well, because it's a threat to what we do. Well, so what? What we do is supposed to educate children. Yeah, but we may lose kids out of our school. Well, why would you lose kids out of your school if you're doing a good job? Well, we just might. And if we give them another option in which they might learn better, that could be a problem. Same argument with the homeschool concept. There's always resistance to change when you have a status quo system. Always resistance, always. But how do you argue with being number one in the country? You have wait lists. We only have 30 charter schools in 3 decades up here. Why? What's there to be afraid of? Why? That question's not answered. Those people that came to testify, they're happy with what they got. What about the people on the wait list? Here's the other thing, guys. If there was no wait list, if it was just some bizarre idea from Dunleavy that, hey, let's set up charter schools and nobody goes to them. Well, come on, we wouldn't be having that discussion. We wouldn't be having that discussion. Number one in the nation. And our student populations that most people don't think succeed in education are doing better in that. We're having a discussion now about tribal schools, which are very similar, focusing around a mission. Very similar. Why are we having that discussion if everything is working well? Are our test scores in our neighborhood schools, are they all working well? They're not.
Okay, now let's go to Mark Sabatini with the Juneau Empire.
Governor, when the legislature overrode 8 of your 12 executive orders, there was a statement from your office saying, look, I'm going to keep doing this. The speaker said a veto override is at least probable on this. And so the question I have is, you seem to be taking something, and I'm sorry, the statement your office issued last night was essentially, well, not only did I do this, but I'll be monitoring other legislation to see if it contains anything contains funding that I think should also be rejected. Essentially, you seem to be taking what I would call a confrontational stance. These press conferences you've had this session certainly are not characteristic of past years. My question is, what are your objectives with this approach? How do you think this is going to help you achieve them?
What are my objectives?
Well, and how do you think this approach is going to help you achieve that?
What are my objectives of an approach to do the right thing, Mark? I'll explain that.
An aggressive approach that basically, like I said,
because somebody's got to fight for parents and kids, and I said this in the State of the State, that don't have lobbyists down here in the halls 24/7, whatever, 121 days. Somebody has to be a counterweight to the special interests that have put us in the position we are today, and not just in education, but across the state. Somebody has to fight for them. It'd be so much easier to go along to get along. So much easier. My life would be so much easier. I would have wasted 6 years doing it, because I could have done other things with my life. But if you have a mission to help the people of Alaska, and not the special interests, you're going to end up in conflict. Mark, this whole system was designed to some degree to have some conflict. If it wasn't, I don't know why they have separation of powers, two bodies, caucuses, et cetera, et cetera. It's geared to grind down ideas into only the most viable that will get across. It's just the way it is. Now, this is an interesting one. We have one of the most robust initiative processes in the country. I didn't make it up. The framers of our Constitution put that in there. And you should read why they put that in there. They put that in there because they felt from time to time, the legislative process may not work for the people of Alaska. So they want to give the people of Alaska to create and pass legislation if they couldn't get it through their own system. Because if they didn't believe that, and if you read the minutes, you'll see exactly that, you'd never have this initiative process. So why am I doing what I'm doing? Because I believe that every single child, it's a moral imperative for me not to kowtow to NEA. It's a moral imperative for me to do everything I can to help kids and to help parents. Look at my entire history and you'll see that. You'll see what I do. And if it's confrontational, there's confrontation all the time. I'm not trying to be confrontational, but if it's saying to this bill, yeah, it's a great bill, I'd be in front of you guys today and you would be asking me totally different questions. Governor, last week, 2 weeks ago, you said you weren't gonna, roll over like a rainbow trout on this bill. You were gonna fight the bill. You were gonna make sure things were in there. You'd be asking me those questions, Mark. The fact of the matter is, the legislative process got close, but doesn't have these measures in there that the people and the children of Alaska really need. They're gonna get the money. That's a given. They're going to get money to run the schools. But why? Why, when there was an opportunity, did we not take advantage of it to determine if teachers will stay if they get a bonus? Why? Why didn't we take advantage of an opportunity in a system that works? The charter schools in Alaska, #1 in the nation, came out in November. We're #1. Where's the expansion on it? So if being confrontational is doing the right thing and having a moral imperative, I'm guilty.
Okay, now let's go to Steve Kirsch with Alaska's News Source.
Yeah, hi, Governor. So when the Senate majority and Senator Bill Wielechowski, they basically said your provision on charter schools is a non-starter for them. And right now, it just looks like there's no avenue for a compromise between the two bodies and maybe even some in the House. So how do you plan to get there? Because right now it just seems like you guys are going nowhere. You're just going in circles. How do you plan to get to a compromise and a solution on this?
I think at this point, we move on. We've got energy issues we got to deal with. We got a whole host of issues we have to deal with, and there'll be many of those issues we can come around and agree with. I think when it comes to energy, you're going to see everyone needs to turn on the light. So I think we're pivoting right now. We're going to energy. Will there be money in education? Yeah, it's going to happen in the budget, just like it did every other year. Every other year, the discussions on money and education waited to the end. The House did an amazing thing. I and the people of Alaska should always be indebted for what the House did. They tried to turn it upside down and get education dealt with early on. And some will come, there'll be a question, and someone will say, well, they did, Governor, with this bill, they did. They got a higher BSA in language, but the budgetary process still needs to take place, so there's no money. There's no money appropriated, and it'll be money they decide on how much will go into education.
Okay, and Governor, we have a question that was emailed in from Margie Bauman with the Cordova Times. Governor, the vast majority of K-12 students in Alaska, including those in Cordova, attend neighborhood public schools. Even with the school formula funding in SB 40, those funds are roughly half of what education advocates say is needed.
Education advocates. Thanks, yeah. Margie. Keep going, Jeff.
Okay. Cordova schools are among those already having to cut filling teacher positions and are looking at cutting some programs. Why do you want to give millions of dollars more to charter schools, which would amount to a much greater BSA for charter school students, rather than increase the BSA for students in neighborhood schools?
Well, the entire premise is wrong. We're not giving millions of dollars to charter schools. If every child in the state of Alaska, Margie, and everybody else, this is very important. Every single child in the state of Alaska, by Constitution, is entitled to a free and appropriate education. Many of our children don't attend our schools. Many of them are homeschooled, not associated with the state. Many of them go to private schools, but every single one of them are entitled to an education which requires funding. Now, let's go back to the question. This harks back to what I said earlier. If you have charter schools, they'll leave our schools. Yeah, some will. Some won't. Some will, some won't. But the money is the same amount of money. It's a public charter school. These are not private charter schools. I mean, that's the other thing that people don't understand. This is a public school with a tighter mission, embedded in a charter. They're public schools, Margie. There was no special BSA cutout where if you go to a charter school, the school district loses money or the BSA is lowered. That's not what's happening.
Okay, and we have a question from Ashlyn O'Hara at the Peninsula Clarion in Kenai. Governor, the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District, in which staff would receive $5,000 bonuses under your proposed program, has expressed concerns that the program would incentivize staff to leave its off-the-road and fly-in schools in favor of other rural school districts where they would get paid $15,000 to work in similar locations. What do you say to the school district's response to their worry that the bonus would actually incentivize some of their staff to leave the district?
Boy, I don't even know how to begin to address that question. So, our turnover rates in urban Alaska have historically been lower than our turnover rates in rural Alaska. That's just a fact. And so I'm just imagining myself in Matsu and Wasilla, and I'm teaching Kenai, wherever. I have a house. My kids are going to school there. I got friends there. And I'm going to get paid $5,000, which is fantastic. It's probably more money than I've gotten in my pocket related to schools or school districts in years, if not ever. And I'm going to pull up stakes, rent out my house, tell my children we're going to go to a brand new school, that they're a place they've never been to. I'm going to spend money to get out there. I don't see it happening. There may be some that do that. But I think what's most important in that question is there is a belief that that will work and that people will actually go to some of our places with the highest turnover and in many cases lowest performance. I would love to deal with that problem and solve that problem and then deal with a Matsu teachers or Kenai teachers that want to go do that. I think we can deal with that issue. But that would be a great problem to really take care of. See, what you got to see here, guys, is when you have a question like that, what they're saying is your program will work on the one hand. On the other hand, it's not going to work the way they think because people aren't going to just leave their homes, their friends, their family. The spouse has a job that's not a teacher, or the relative or whatever. That's really not going to happen to the degree that the question itself wants people to believe. I do think it would work. That's why we're trying, but we'll never find out. It was supposed to be a 3-year attempt in research. We'll never find out now. That's not going to happen. So we'll never know. Why? Don't ask me. Ask the folks that killed it.
Okay, and let's go to Sean McGuire with the Anchorage Daily News.
Governor,
Great editorial. Tell your guys back home, okay?
Okay.
Great editorial.
I don't have anything to do with that. It's not the newsroom.
Well, just tell them.
Okay, they might be watching. With the BSA, we could have a different figure in state law come Monday or Tuesday. I'm just curious, as two former school administrators here, you and Commissioner Bishop, if you veto funding for the BSA in the budget, could you just explain, as a former school administrator, I'd like both of you to explain what that would mean for these districts.
Want to come up?
Yeah, I just would like you to explain what that would mean for these districts as they try to finalize their budgets. I understand that could cause a lot of havoc.
Sure, that's a great question. And my name is Dina Bishop, Commissioner of Education, and this is my 34th year serving in Alaska. The majority of those years have been in administration. I have been a school principal. I have been a district office administrator, a math teacher, so I can speak from numbers as well. But in addition, superintendent in 2 of the largest school districts. And I do want to share that during my lifetime, school inputs financially have increased. Have they come in the manner that were the easiest to plan? They haven't, right? We have always, however, had funds. And I have said specifically, the last 3 years of my administration, I have never seen so much money to where we had to increase, the federal funds that were rolled in.
500 million
So,
under COVID.
so I understand the inputs of money. Now, we have every year for the times that I have been a superintendent come over and over again to talk about the BSA. And I want to share that at the same time, we have had the conversations about how do we improve public education. Little has moved, except for maybe now that this is the first time they pulled out from the NAEP a particular group of
The
students.
READS Act, I just want to interrupt you for a moment. That was a benchmark done by legislators, including Tom Begich, but anyways,
Correct.
excuse me.
Correct. So that legislation did, move to improve education. When we look at, is it just money short of outcomes, I think we're looking in the wrong place. And so I have said, yes, invest in public education, which you can do, but also target and talk about and be accountable to the young people in the system who are attending schools. Is it more difficult to plan when you don't know what that number is? Of course, in your own budgets, if you didn't know what your final number would be. I mean, that's a given. However, every year that I've been an administrator, you understand what happens at the end of the session. And so to the point that the legislature tried to handle this early, that should be cherished and applauded because they got that. But the money has always been here, and what I haven't appreciated is that we say the BSA hasn't increased, there hasn't been an increase in 7 years. And that might be true for the BSA, but that is not true for the investment in public education in Alaska. So we don't always tell the whole story. And as commissioner, I want to just begin to tell the whole story that we believe in public education. Our administrators, they're running schools, they're moving kids in the right direction, especially with the READS Act. We have made investment in public education. Is it only about the BSA? Absolutely not. If you want to make improvements, think about where you're putting those improvements. That's why I have spoken to direct investment. The actual funding formula is set up to make investments that you believe matter. We put investments, additional multipliers for career technical, for special education, for gifted and talented, and for ELL. We put them in for cost area differentials, knowing that rural Alaska costs more. We put them in already for size of school because we value small learning communities. The teacher incentive bill did the same thing, identifying the need first rather than just putting money wherever. The closest thing you can have to education, improving education, is the relationship between a teacher and a student. That's investment in public education. We will move on to next year. We will have investment in public education, there's no doubt, like we have the last 15 years of my leadership in 2 of the largest school districts. Getting it done early would have been something that I would have loved as well, just for planning.
So just as a follow-up, I just mean if school funding gets vetoed in May or June, that's going to cause a lot of problems.
That would cause huge problems. That's not the plan. That would cause huge problems. That's not the plan. I was asked by some, well, Sean, do a follow-up because you look confused with my answer there. So.
Also then, whatever the BSA number is come...
No, not necessarily. You just, maybe I misunderstood your question.
School districts write their budgets around the BSA.
Yes.
They base that number off the BSA. So I'm just asking at the end...
They write their budgets around the BSA.
Because that's the amount of funding they assume to get.
But they finalize, because I was a superintendent, thank you, and you were too.
Yeah.
You finalize your budget knowing what the legislature passed in their budget package. That's what we do every year as superintendents and board members.
My understanding is no governor has ever vetoed down the BSA because that is the figure that school districts rely on to base their budgets.
Oh, okay.
Come May or June, whenever the
Yes.
budget passes,
Yeah.
will you allow whatever that BSA figure is to go out to school districts?
Yeah, and I'm trying to be evasive. I'm just trying to understand what you're asking, and maybe it could be me not understanding it. Right now, what is the BSA figure in law?
$5,960.
Okay. And so when we work with the final budget with the legislature, if that's the budget, if that is what the legislature is thinking about putting into the budget, let me just answer it this way. I'm going to do the best I can. I'd be hard-pressed to not see an increase in education given the inflationary pressures, to be honest with you. Sean, I'm going to cross that bridge when I come to it. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it.
Okay, and let's go to James Brooks with the Alaska Beacon.
Sure. Excuse me. Sean, if this bill was allowed to go into law, I would still cross that bridge when I come to it. We have a thing called a PFD that's in law. That thing has been brutalized the last few years. My goal is to make sure that our schools have the funding that they need. But we got to cross that bridge when we come to it to see what the final package is.
And that actually touches on what my question was going to be, because yesterday my thought was if you allowed the bill to come into law, you could still have the argument later about, well, if you don't give me the elements that I'm looking for, I can veto down the amount. And so I wanted to ask, why not take that approach? Because
it wasn't going to happen. And I don't mean to interrupt you, James.
Oh, sure.
Meaning it didn't happen in January, February, and now we're into March. It was made clear that there was not the support to put it in there. There were various groups, and I named one or two, that didn't want these things. And so that's the 20 days showed us that. And you got to get on. You can't be having this thing linger for the very reasons that Sean was indicating, but you can't be nothing but a chaotic educational period for the rest of the session. We got huge issues with energy, and I'm not just saying that. So what happened here was we tried to get stuff and teacher bonuses, charter schools. That didn't happen. So we got to move on. We got to fund education, which is going to happen, but we have to move on because if not, it's just going to be chaotic. Even if the bill passed, right, there would be continual questions. Is Dunleavy going to veto it? Is Dunleavy going to veto it? Is Dunleavy's going to veto it? Clear up maybe a myth. Dunleavy doesn't go home at night and sharpen knives on the kitchen table at the mansion saying, I can't wait to use these. We've had budgetary issues. We've had dropping oil prices up and down all over the place. I gave you guys last time we had a conference a little graphic with pencils. Because the narrative out there, the myth out there is Dunleavy has hacked us to death. $500 million from the feds came under Dunleavy and went right to the school districts. But if you look at that graph over the years, Dunleavy didn't hack you to death. There's been increases in funding. There's been money in education. So to not belabor this, I think the educational discussion is over and we got to move on to energy.
And just if I could take that question in a different direction then, do you think there'll be any bad blood though among legislators over this and they won't be willing
well,
to
I can't answer on the legislators, not from me. I mean, I'm transactional. I'm a business. This is business. We have the people's business. I would hope there wouldn't be. I would hope that the people have sent folks down here that go, yeah, that was contentious and that's part of the system, but now we got to move on. Because if they don't and they want to roll around on the rug like it's a scrum and not get things done on energy and some other important things, I think that's why I think to some degree James, it's why we don't have things going on around here that we should have going on around here. So I hope not. I'm not going to do that.
Okay, and we'll stay with the Alaska Beacon. Claire Strumple.
Thanks. Governor, you've said that you support an increased BSA, which wasn't included in your proposed budget. And I'm curious what changed and what number you would support or what range you would support.
Because usually what happens in the process, we have the discussions about what other, the other side of the coin, as I keep calling it, what educational improvements, charter schools, homeschools, you name it, can we talk about as well? Because then that will decide potentially what kind of funding or targeted funding, which would then have determined what really the BSA is going to look like, because there's only a certain amount of money. So that's why we didn't put that in there. Not because we were going to zero out the BSA. That's never going to happen. It was to have the discussions, make this an educational and energy year. Education's done. It's now an energy part before it's over. That's why.
So do you have a sense of what you would support?
I want to be able to sit down, to be honest with you, I want to be able to sit down with legislators in the budgetary process and come up with a figure that can be supported. Look, the initial discussions in the legislature was $300 increase. And then Kenai came up with $680. And then there were amendments on the floor of over 1,000. So, I mean, folks are all over the map. So we needed to have the discussion as to what amount would take care of most of our school districts in a manner that we can all agree on. And that's what we'll have.
Okay, and our last question is from Becky Bohr with the Associated Press.
Governor, respectfully, I'm kind of confused. So in your letter to the presiding officers, you said it is imperative that the legislature take direct financial action to incentivize top quality educators to teach and remain in Alaska. Your press release last night talked about still time to address broadband, still time in the session to enhance our charter school offerings and methods by which they are chartered. And 38 minutes into this press conference, you said, we're moving on. So why not just say that last night? Like, if you're ready to turn the page, like, or are you still going to hold this over? Or
no. What I mean, Becky, for example, if the legislature wants to do a broadband bill, they don't have to vet it. It's already been vetted. If they want to do a separate broadband bill, they could put it in. I'm saying what I'm doing is pivoting to the energy issues that we have. I'm not going to belabor the educational issues for the rest of this session. We did that. The House started doing that, started out with that. So if there are individual educational issues or bills that come forward that people want to work on, that's fine. My administration is going to focus on and work with the legislature on things like energy. This whole Dunleavy is going to hold things over. That is not my goal, or that is not my plan. My plan is to get things done and solve problems for the people of Alaska. We thought we had a charter school problem. Representative Carpenter recognized that last year, put a bill in. They put the bill in this omnibus package. We thought it was a good bill to have the discussions. Apparently we're not going to do anything with that. Teacher education. The broadband bill, there's a couple broadband bills out there. If people want to run them, they can run them. What I'm saying, my administration's got to focus on energy. It's important.
Would you be open to a Pebble question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, James.
So we saw the state file this legal complaint today, $700 billion request. I mean, do you think the state's actually going to get that?
I have no idea, right? You have a November election that may change the complexion of the world in this country. I don't know, but that's state property. See, this is another one. This is a great question, right? Pebble, some people feel, is a thing to run as fast as possible away from. It's $1 trillion worth of wealth. It's on state land. I'm not going to stop saying that the proper development of any mining play in the state of Alaska, including Pebble, is a bad thing. I'm not going to do that. We can't develop that if we don't get requisite permits. The whole basis of Alaska in collectivizing its resources was we were supposed to be able to develop them and pay for our way. If we were able to develop the resources that we have a lot of these discussions we're having today wouldn't even occur. And that's going to be, you know, that James, that could be a story for looking at the next 5 to 10 years. What's Alaska going to look like if we're not going to develop our resources and we're going to continue to need more money? So I hope so. $700 billion, we could use that in the state of Alaska. That would be fantastic. But right now, at least the current administration is happy to go to China, Iran, Venezuela, and you've probably seen the tweet, we get sanctioned 55 times, those guys get sanctioned 13 or 19 times. So I'm going to keep pushing Alaska's resource development. I will keep pushing energy, whether it's solar, wind, geothermal, oil, coal, nukes. We don't have the luxury in the state of Alaska, like other states, to say, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. We really have to look at everything done responsibly in order for us to be able to survive as a state. So, great question, James. Ready? Just a couple facts before I close. There's a recent Rutgers study that placed Alaska's second most adequately funded K-12 system. We're still saying we're going to put money into it, but I'm just telling you, Rutgers isn't saying we are the 50th in terms of funding, the second most. But we're going to put money, and we are. I'm sincere when I say that. SB 140 would have been a record increase in the BSA. And again, you know, we know where it came from. It wasn't a Harvard firm, a Harvard outfit that researched what Alaska needs. It came from a school district. I don't blame them. In the last 20 years, the state increased per student spending 91%, while inflation was 65%. And what happened during this time? Student populations have gone down, and test scores have gone down as well. Now, somebody's going to say, well, it's Dunleavy saying because we gave more money. No, there's other things going on. But I could tell you in our charter schools, outcomes are better. Alaska has the best charter schools, obviously, but among the worst supported charter schools. Meaning, when you look at what all the other states do and how they charter, we're saying right now this is it. This is the only way we're going to do charter schools in the state of Alaska. Why? Why aren't there other ways to grow them? I'm not proposing like other states. I'm just letting you know. I'm not proposing Wild West private charters. What we were proposing is the state be able to charter, the state of Alaska be able to charter. It wasn't a big ask. Numerous Alaskan families are trying to get into high-performing charter schools. We have wait lists. We have backlogs. Alaska is one of only 5 states that gives local school boards sole authority to approve charter schools. And I've heard it 15 different times, local control. The Morse settlement that occurred years ago in Alaska said that the state needs to intervene. It's in law now, passed numerous laws, which at the time impacted local control. But we have several AS 1400 statutes in education that say we should intervene when necessary to ensure that students are going to get a good education. Now, all we're saying on the charter schools is let the state charter. Nope. And this is the truth. The parents controlling charter schools is the ultimate local control. That's the ultimate local control. Parents being part of their kids' education. Charter schools are not a partisan issue. You look at the District of Columbia, Washington, 76% of the population are registered Democrats that vote in Washington, and 48% of all kids go to charter schools in Washington. In many of your big cities, charter schools are promoted by Democrat mayors. And I'm not saying this was a Democrat thing. And there are folks across lines that are on one side of the issue, and there's others that are against it, or on the other side. So in the end, I would say this: is it contentious? Yes. Are there people that are disappointed that the bill has been vetoed? Yes, of course there is. There's always disappointment when a bill is vetoed. And I didn't take the veto lightly. A lot of work went into education in this session. Again, thank you, Speaker Tilton. Thank you, Republican majority in the House. And thank you for some of the members in the Senate that really wanted to get something done so we could move into the next couple years without having the battle over education. It didn't happen. This would have been just a spending bill. You don't need the bill to spend money. We've been spending money every year. You don't need the bill to do that. And the idea that once it's in law, you would have to spend that amount of money, that notion was killed in the lawsuit called Wielechowski versus the state, when the judges said everything's an appropriation. So really the final law is your appropriation. So we're gonna get money, but the idea that SB 140, there's no BSA, that's not true. That's not true. So the bill's vetoed. They're looking at calling themselves in the joint session next week, Tuesday? When is it? Monday. Okay. And they'll have to make a decision, each and every one of the legislators. If I'm going to vote to override, why? And I would ask you guys to ask each and every one of them the question. If they say, well, we wanted to put more money in, this bill doesn't do that. It just sets a mark at 680. It's the budget that puts the money in. If they say that, we're voting for it because we didn't like charter schools, okay. Or we're voting to override because we didn't like charter schools, okay. Or we're voting to override because we don't think teachers, there should be a retention, okay. But in the end, today for me is a new day. I'm moving forward. I had meetings already this morning on energy in Alaska. And there's gonna be we'll do another press conference in the future, promising possibilities across the board, the combination of renewables and traditional fuels for Alaska. I think everybody's talking about transmission lines. I see a whole new world for Alaska in which if everything works out well and people are able to put, these things aside, like this situation, this bill and this veto, my feelings aren't hurt that there's no charter schools. It's a missed opportunity. But I think there's some tremendous opportunities on energy, and that we have to address it. And so I think that's what we should do. And there will be money in education, and maybe next year we visit education again. But I think for this year, we got a lot of other things to work on, and I look forward to working with the legislature on it. So I want to thank you. I got to work on things like energy, and appreciate the time.